We're told there's a first for everything, and now I guess there is, because there is such a thing as women with XY chromosomes, and they deserve the right to punch other women with XX chromosomes in the face. That's it. The trans lobby has finally found their unicorn. They can prove that because intersex people exist, well then trans people must exist, even though those are two different kinds of people. We'll talk about why it's important that we protect women's sports, but more importantly, protect the truth today on Indie Thinker. Now, you may not be familiar with the name Caster Semenya, but you may be familiar with the story of Caster Semenya, who was a runner at the 2012 and 2016 Olympic Games for South Africa. Depending upon who you asked, Semenya is either a hero or a thief, and in my opinion,
that ain't no woman.
While awaiting appeal for competition, Semenya was allowed to compete in both of those games where gold was achieved. Just recently, in 2023, the decision was reached in Semenya's favor by the ECHR with a 4-3 decision, quote, finding that the competition rules had discriminated against her and infringed upon her human rights. Now, I made sure to put that in quotes for you because Semenya is notable, and there was a controversy about those Olympics because Semenya has internal testes, no uterus, an undeveloped penis that was identified as a vagina at birth, and a level of testosterone that would be likened unto a man. Oh yeah, and XY chromosomes to boot. But Semenya was trotted out as a victim of discrimination from an unjust world that won't stop shoving its puritanical values down our throat. We were even treated to stories of how rules forced him to take hormone suppressors and it made him sick, which indeed is unjust. No one should be forced to take hormone blockers, which is why, little PSA here, I think children under the age of 18 who cannot consent to that kind of barbarity also should not be forced to take hormone blockers. Anyway, he could have refused to take those hormone blockers if he wanted to, and then run with men. But we all know what that means. Less gold medals. But instead, many in the media clung to the story that Semenya was a brave hero taking down the patriarchy and fighting for women in a sport where he was beating women and in a sport where male biology gives you a distinct advantage against women. I bring this story up not because we're facing that same scenario here again, but we are in a similar situation where another athlete with XY chromosomes is competing against women, but this time with much more deleterious effects. I think it is safe to assume that Algerian boxer Imane Khelif has a similar biological makeup to that of Caster Semenya. You can trust that Imane likely has male and female parts, but we will never really know. We only know that last week, Imane stepped into the spotlight after ending the Olympic run of Italian boxer Angela Carini in 46 seconds after only 2 punches. You can see it here. So as you can see, the much stronger and bigger Algerian boxer smashes the Italian woman, who is much smaller, in the face. She refuses then to shake her competitor's hand after the loss and then collapses to the ground in tears after her dreams have been destroyed. Immediately, people online responded to the sight of Angela Carini's loss, decrying the demolition of women's sports. Even Logan Paul jumped into the action, offering Italian boxer Angela Carini to fight for his company in the wake of her tragic loss to a man. This created outrage on the left from a group of people who finally thought their coup de grace had come. Keyboard warriors from everywhere came out to jump in to the defense of Khelif. And then they even found childhood pictures that they could show that presumably proves that somehow Imane Khelif is a girl, even though Imane Khelif has XY chromosomes. Imane was disqualified years earlier from the International Boxing Association for having XY chromosomes. Now, the IOC, for its part, was quick to come out and condemn the IBA because it made the IOC look like a bunch of morons and liberal progressive fools, and well, they are. And so the IOC condemned the IBA and said that there's not enough transparency in their testing. But I would suggest the lack of transparency is only if you think that XY chromosomes make you a woman, which they don't. Because that is exactly the test that the IBA did. They tested Imane for chromosomes and found that she has X and Y, where women have XX chromosomes. Now, there's been some speculation as to what else they found out about Imane, but you can just rest assured this. Even if they didn't test for testosterone in the IBA, when you have XY chromosomes, it comes with a whole bunch of other things and sometimes body parts and higher levels of testosterone almost always. But to this evidence, many on the internet thought that it was their time to shine, to defend the fact that there could be a woman with XY chromosomes. To this, Bible skeptic and self-proclaimed scholar Dan McClellan chimed in to remind us that women with XY chromosomes can get pregnant. Now, try to find your way out of that rhetorical bombshell. Dan is technically correct about his assertion. There are times where a handful of women, just a handful with XY chromosomes, have ever gotten pregnant. However, they have only done so when they have a uterus and they have had to have eggs donated to them and then implanted in that uterus. Only then, on rare occasion, can a person with XY chromosomes ever give birth to a child. The real problem with Dan's example is that he has no idea what's going on with the biological makeup of Imane. We only know that he has XY chromosomes, which does make someone a man.
She is suffering from the worst case of hemorrhoids I have ever seen!
But other than that, that's all we know. But we can assume, perhaps, that Imane probably has a genetic disorder, something likely akin to Sawyer syndrome, that made him in almost every way a male with very few exceptions, which is why I have been calling Imane he this whole time. So there's a couple lessons that we can take away from this ordeal that I think is important to parse out. And first and foremost, it's this, that exceptions never disprove the rule. Human biology is sexually dimorphic. You are either male or you are female. Deformities don't prove anything. So if you are born without a leg, all of a sudden, do we now suggest that humans are both bipedal and unipedal, if that's what they would be? That there is such a thing as a new brand of human being that only has one leg? No, of course. We understand within context that a genetic defect is a genetic defect, and that's all that it is, and it's all that it ever will be. It's unfortunate, but it doesn't mean that when you have a genetic defect that predisposes you towards male biology, that now you get to fight women. But for the life of me, this is what trans activists have been arguing forever, that the reality of intersex people now somehow reaffirms the movement, but not the obvious common sense conclusion that we should make from this, which is, no, people with XY chromosomes should not be fighting women with XX chromosomes. If anything, there should be a third category that we make for those people if they just refuse to fight men. Fine, we can have that discussion. But the one thing that we should not ever consent to is the fact that a woman with XY chromosomes is equal or on the same level playing field with that of a person that has XX chromosomes. Now, the internet was ablaze with the kind of stupid arguments that you can expect when this kind of thing happens. Well, what about Michael Phelps? He was double jointed. That gives him a competitive advantage. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm really trying to turn over a new leaf in my life, and I'm trying to be nicer. But what the hell is wrong with you people? A person that is double jointed is nowhere near equivalent to a person who has XY chromosomes. So the point is that we can have a conversation about a third category for people in sports, but there is no third category for people in life. You're either male or female, and your genetic deformities do not give you the right to a competitive advantage over females in sports. And this is the second thing that we need to be honest about. Lies hurt people. We've heard from Jack Nicholson.
You can't handle the truth!
And in many ways, this is true. The truth can hurt, but it only hurts in a superficial way that can provide a more fundamental and transformative impact in an individual's life. So in other words, the truth may hurt your feelings, but it is actually ultimately beautiful and good. Now, on the other hand, lies carry with it maybe a superficial feeling initially of joy and satisfaction, but in the long term only hurt people. In fact, it can feel a lot like getting punched directly in the nose and having your nose broken. Now, we don't live in a common sense world anymore that can agree with that kind of thing, and that's really sad. And that's simply because in the West, we no longer have a fixed point of truth that we look to, a standard for truth by which we live by, that we agree upon anymore in the West. It used to be Judeo-Christian ethics and values, but it is no longer that. And as we have gotten away from that, we have put ourselves in a position where now your truth, my truth, and anybody's truth, regardless of how contradictory they are to each other, are supposed to coincide and live together in harmony, and they can't. There's such a thing as the law of non-contradiction. And that law states that if two things are in contradiction to each other, one or the other of them is false. They can both be wrong, but they can't both be right. And when we live in a world where we're constantly trying to force incongruent things together, well, you finally find broken noses at the other end of that collision. Now, the third thing, and the most important thing, is this, is that if we are actually going to come to some type of agreement, some type of livable society, we're going to have to figure out from whence truth comes from. We're going to have to decide from what repository of truth are we as a society going to hold ourselves together. We have to agree at least upon something. We can't just be randomly autonomous individuals with our own version of reality, all walking in harmony with one another. That will never work. Pluralism in terms of food, great. Pluralism in terms of our understanding of reality, deadly. So this is where the people who come out of the woodwork and say, well, why do you care about this in the first place? Will always suggest that I'm being dishonest somehow because you don't care about female boxing. Well, indeed, and true, I don't. And in fact, female boxing is a stupid sport, akin to the WNBA. But the reason I care is not because I care about boxing, it's simply because I care about a society predicated upon truth. I believe truth matters. An old Bible story may help here. The Tower of Babel was a man-centered endeavor intended to build a tower to grant people access to heaven. Some parallels to corrupt religion are in order here. So we can talk about how the institution of the church is when it's corrupt and how evil that is. But more fundamentally, this is an illustration of what men will do without God. The people came together, they began to build this huge skyscraper to go to heaven. God shows up mercifully and says, these people are going to keep on building until they die, and then generation after generation will keep on this project. And so God comes in to stop the whole thing, saying nothing will restrain these people from which they have imagined to do. So God steps in, confuses their language so that they can't communicate, and then the building effort is thwarted. So it's really an act of mercy that God steps in and stops them. In other words, a humanistic endeavor creates structures that ignore God and end in utter confusion and futility. I think that's the lesson here. Does that sound familiar? Yes. Without any source of truth, our world will suffer at the hands of the kind of confusion that celebrates a man beating up a woman. It will celebrate an Olympics that rejoices in naked blue men while mocking the Savior who died for you. I'll be hard-pressed to convince an atheist or a secularist that they are responsible for the confusion of our age, where we no longer can tell if men can be women, if children should be mutilated. But if God is not on the throne, someone must take his place. That throne is too big and the crown too heavy for any human to wear. Humanism and secular liberal progressivism has proven time and time again that it is not a great replacement for Christian truth. That when Christian truth is on the throne, that the society that is a benefactor of it thrives. So even Nietzsche realized this in his parable about the madman. He said this, quote, "How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderer of all murderers? What was the holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives? Who will wipe this blood off of us? With what water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what secret games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it?" The answer for those paying attention at the Olympics and beyond is yes. You will have to become God, and in the process redefine biology, morality, purpose, forgiveness, justice, free will, and so much more. You will have to sit on the throne if God is not on it. If you find that Christianity has the solid ethics and values needed to govern a society better than whatever arbitrary shifting sands of culture that the secular humanist wants, well then maybe, just maybe, God did make them male and female, and he's right, and we should let that truth govern and order society. All exceptions to that are pitiful attempts, pitiful fish-shaking attempts at heaven. And atheists should know that it really does make you look foolish. I want to read something one of my pastor friends wrote because he was one of the few pastors who was willing to speak out on this issue. And as a result, he has something to lose, because if his congregation takes exception to this, or if they think he's quote unquote being mean to Imane Khelif, then potentially there are some repercussions for his church. But nonetheless, my friend, Pastor Ben Hodges, was willing to step into the fray and say this. A young lady boxer had everything she's sweated for, everything she's trained for, many things she's dreamed of, and much of what she has worked so hard for stolen from her because Olympic leadership allowed a male to get into the ring with her and punch her in the face. The unavoidable consequences of gender confusion politics is that real women and children are harmed. This is not kind, this is not reasonable, this is not justice. Christians are not mean-spirited if you are shocked by the silliness of gender politics you've recently observed on grand display in the Olympics and other places. You are not breaking the commands of your Savior and Lord if you believe men in dresses and confused women need pity and prayer and to repent of their sins. You are not a bigot just because some ex-evangelical quotes a passage at you. When you are biblically faithful and hold to the view that men are men and women are women, you are being reasonable and faithful and a good citizen in a pluralistic society. Offense and anger are valid Christian emotions and valid emotions for good citizens. You should be angry when your school lets confused men and boys change clothes with your daughters in the same locker room. You should make noise when confused men use the women's restroom. You should demand transparency from your school board on their policies of transgender support and vote for people who are reasonable. If your pastor has never said anything like what you just heard about this scenario or about transgenderism more broadly, then I want to highly encourage you to do something. Take your pastor to coffee, sit down and ask him about what he thinks about transgenderism, and if he doesn't give you a biblical answer, then you need to gently encourage him to rethink his position. And then I want to encourage you one more time. You need to rethink your position on where you go to church. Because if Christians will not step to the plate and defend the truth, who will? If not us, who, if not now, when? I know it's a little cliche, but the truth is that so many Christians are so afraid of being quote unquote divisive that they would rather sit on the sidelines. They're so interested in appealing to the masses that they never speak a truth worth hearing, which is exactly what appeals to the masses and what the masses genuinely need. If you are more concerned about losing social clout if on social media you post the truth, then it's possible that you really don't value the truth. And the earth is suffering from those kind of Christians because right now, we don't know how to govern our society around any kind of firm foundation that will hold us together and that the building can actually sit on. And the reverberations of that will have implications like what we saw at the Olympics and far beyond that if we don't finally decide to build our house on a firm foundation. So my suggestion to each and every one of us, Christian or not, is just this. If we can't come up with anything better than God's divine design, then it's best we go with that. And Christians should be the first to step to the plate to defend it. All right, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to comment down below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And go with God.